Welcome to the Business of Race podcast, where we examine issues of race and racism, how they impact business, and what employers can do to address these issues to create a healthier work environment for everyone. I'm your host, Regina Newkirk-Rucci, the Director of Equity for 90 Forward, a racial equity and justice nonprofit based in Jacksonville, Florida. And today I am so delighted to be joined in the conference room by the incomparable Andrea Reyes, who is an immigration attorney. And is that solely what you focus on as far as law?
That's the only thing I do, yep.
All right. And just have been so profound in this community and really making a difference, and the perfect person to have this discussion with today. So our agenda topic is how employers can assist immigrant workers. And I think this is a really important topic because I think it's something that a lot of employers don't know a lot about. I think we've sort of talked about immigration in these big political terms, but understanding the nuances of it becomes a little bit more challenging. So today I'm really hoping that you can shed some light on some things and really help employers be of great assistance to people who are newly immigrating or have been immigrating to the United States for a while. So let's start off with just some basic information, because I think we tend to think about immigration in terms of either you have legal status or you're undocumented. And there's a lot of areas in between. So much. So what are some of the status considerations that employers in particular need to know about people who are immigrating to the United States?
So first of all, thank you for this invitation. I am honored to work with this nonprofit organization. Since you guys came onto the scene, you have been killing it, and I'm very excited to be a part of the amazing progressive work that you're doing in our community. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And we're so glad to have you as a part of it.
And also, thank you for using the word undocumented in the comparison, because you're right. It's either you're legal or illegal, right? That's the terminology that's used a lot in politics and policy making, in the news. And so it just gets boggled down to one or the other. And immigration law has been compared to tax law in terms of level of complexity. Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, if we start off with that analysis, like that comparison, you're dealing with a process that's very complicated, very convoluted, very timely, and it has multiple layers, different government agencies that are involved, and so. Yes, I definitely think maybe a good starting point is to kind of define what is status. There's a big question of, as like you said, right, there's a lot of misunderstanding about just the simplicity of it. And there's nothing simple about immigration or immigration status or immigrants' lives. So let's just start off with that. I think so we start off with documented versus undocumented. An undocumented person is a person who does not have legal status here in the United States, does not have either a temporary status, like a tourist visa, a student visa. Some of the work visas are temporary statuses. And then there is temporary statuses, right, which is, a green card holder or a naturalized U.S. citizen, right? So those are kind of like the main ones. But in between all that, there's people who are in process, right? They're applying for their status. They're in process of their, legal status, whichever one that's going to be for them. And that comes in the form of people who are applying for asylum. Mm-hmm. Deferred action for early childhood arrival, which is DACA, TPS, which is temporary protective status for, there's about, don't quote me, but I think there's about 7 countries right now that have TPS, which is a temporary status that is given to them. And all of those have work permits. Mm-hmm. And with the work permit comes a Social Security card, right? So a lot of these individuals that are in process don't have a final legal status, right? They don't have a permanent residence or they don't have a citizenship, but they have the capacity to work legally.
Okay, so
right?
you can get a work permit while your legal status as far as citizenship is in process?
Well, so you have to first be a legal permanent resident in order to apply for citizenship. Citizenship is like the final step, right? But we're just kind of going over the different types of statuses. So everybody's in a different process. What happens, though, is that while they're in that process, while their asylum is pending, while their green card is pending, once they have DACA, once they have TPS, they get a work permit. So not everybody that has a work permit, right, is applying for their green card. Not everybody that has a work permit has a legal status inside the United States. A lot of times they are currently in process of applying. So there's that distinction of lawful permanent resident, already U.S. citizen versus someone that is in process applying for one of those types of reliefs.
Okay. So just so I understand, because I think the other thing that a lot of people get really confused about or have no idea about is the time for these things. So if I'm immigrating to the country and I start the initial process. So even to just get the work permit that gives me that temporary status, about how long does it take to get a temporary status?
So that's going to depend on the process. So, if you're in an asylum process, it's very different than if you're applying for your residency. If you have a work visa and you're being petitioned by your employer, that's a very different process than an asylum process. If you have DACA, if you're applying for DACA, different process than TPS. So in immigration, the website, you actually can go to a website that tells you the processing time for each type of application or process. So it really depends.
Okay.
What I will tell you is that pre-pandemic, USCIS, which is the agency that handles the adjudication of these affirmative applications, they would, they were severely behind, but it hadn't been brought to light so much, but the pandemic kind of brought that to light. It surfaced all that goo. And so we have, since then, understood the severity of USCIS's and the government's delays so much that Congress actually gave money to USCIS to help with the backlog, the severe backlog. There's been a lot of articles that talk about this backlog. What existed before the pandemic just brought it to light.
Just exacerbated it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's really going to depend on the process. And I will tell you, so I just had a consultation this morning for a marriage petition. Straightforward marriage petition. The person's here. The immigrant is in their country. It's going to take about 2 years to get him here.
2 years. So I was thinking, the first step might be a few weeks to a few months, but we could be talking multiple years.
Oh.
And this is just to get that sort of temporary status, right? That would be a green card
That's a green card. Yeah, that's a green card. Yep. That's a permanent status right there. That's about 2 years.
So how long would we be talking about generally? Like if I'm coming from another country and I want to become a citizen of the United States, how much time can I expect for that process to be, in assuming that, I've got a great background history, I'm working, I'm doing all of the things that I should be doing,
right,
and there's no red flags, no issues, none of that. About how long should I expect for that process to be?
So it's going to depend on what process you're going through. Again, there's about 100 processes that you can apply through in immigration. But so I think it's important to kind of back up for a second. So people who come to the United States can't just get a work permit. They can't just get residency, right? Something has to happen, which is a petition. They have to be petitioned. Either a family member, a qualifying family member petitions for them, a corporation petitions for them. They do an auto petition, meaning we have something called, like, for example, the VAWA, domestic violence petition. They can auto petition for themselves. Or they're part of like a type of humanitarian visa that would allow them to have a temporary status for them to then be able, step 2, apply for the green card. So there are multiple steps that have to take place. And so it really depends. If you go the family route, is that family member a spouse, a parent, or a child of a U.S. citizen? Because that classification is much faster than if you are resident, if you are your petitioning family member is a legal permanent resident. It's slower. If they're a legal permanent resident, then they're a United States citizen. It's going to depend if it's an employment, right? How long do you have to have the temporary work visa for before the company is willing to file the I-140 petition for you? And then, right, once you have your status, depending on how you got your status, you have to wait an additional 3 or 5 years in order to apply for your citizenship. So, I mean, it's a process. You know, I've known individuals who have gone through the employment process, took them 10 to 12 years to get their citizenship.
Wow. I mean, I'm just listening to you is making my head hurt. And it's such an overwhelming process, which I also then think about somebody who is new to the States. This is, not all of this is foreign to them. And then have all of these things on top of it. Just the process.
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. And I was sitting here thinking, like, I don't know which avenue I would take. I don't know which one I would. And I imagine there's some people who have no idea, like, which one's better? What should I do? How do I do this? It just seems like a tremendous amount of knowledge is required, stress involved, and it sounds extraordinarily legal. Like you said, comparing it to the tax code, I think that might be really nice. It sounds like the tax code might be easier. Good grief. That's much.
It just depends on what they're eligible for, right? So if you don't have qualifying, if you don't have family to petition for you, then a family petition is not going to be an option for you. Right. So depending on what your skill set, what you do in your country, you might be able to apply for a work visa. But even then, that's limited, right? Because the company has to petition for you.
But I would also have to know that. And so essentially, you're talking about people essentially have to almost pair up with an attorney immediately to sort of help them through this process.
It's definitely recommended. Yes.
Right. And so they also have to know that. So there's a lot. Okay. All right. So let's take it to employers now, because we've said that there are ways that people can get work permits in these in process applications or in process status. What are some of the things that employers can do? Because again, I'm like, this is overwhelming. We've been talking for 5 minutes, and I'm like, oh, good grief, I need to lay down. So what are some things that employers could do to really help people who are in process of immigrating to the United States, and could be all of these various avenues, which have various considerations with them? What are some things that employers should be looking at, considering, particularly if they either have a high number of immigrants who are working for them, B, they have the kind of job that would really be attractive to immigrant workers, or C, that's an area where they want to recruit from? What are some things that employers should be looking at?
Yeah, those are great questions. So in this conversation, right, really points towards employers who want to hire immigrants who have work authorization, right? Because a lot of employers do have to do E-Verify, which is the program where employers verify the lawful status of the employees, and typically requires a work permit with a social and an ID. And so that combination, right? So employers actually, if they have a work permit, they get to see the category. There's actually a number on the the employment authorization that tells them what the category is. So even if the employee doesn't necessarily want to share that in the workplace, because it is a very private matter, the employer could know based on the category what that person is in process for. And I think having practicing empathy and sensitivity to the fact that they are in process is the number one thing. The empathy, right? There's multiple ways to display that. Obviously, immigration has unfortunately become a very political, polarized issue. Immigrants have been used and abused in politics in the recent years. And so, staying away from talking about politics in the workflows is obviously recommendable in general, right? Just because you know that can create hostilities between people and disagreements and misunderstandings. But a very important point for employers to understand is that immigrants are not monolithic. Like they don't necessarily vote for their interests when it comes to immigration. They will vote oftentimes against their interest. If, especially, and we saw this, in the recent elections with different countries voting heavily towards the Republican side and heavily towards the Democrat side. So just be aware that just because they're an immigrant doesn't mean that immigration is going to be like their source of, motivation. It might be another thing like religion. It might be another thing like, the political line itself. And so immigration is just a part of it, but it's not like the full part of it. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, we were actually having this conversation with Robert, who's with the Hispanic Federation, and talking about the fact that we really also think, especially in this country, we have created the Latino community with no recognition that different people are from different countries of origin, which have then different experiences, different viewpoints, different statuses. And again, not a monolithic group, even in those countries of origin, right? But having conversations with Puerto Ricans in Central Florida is very different than having conversations with people who are from Venezuela in South Florida, right? In different issues, different touch points,
absolutely,
and different concerns. There's also the fact that I think we tend to think of immigration in terms of people from the Latino community, not recognizing that if you are not born in the United States, like there are a lot of Canadians who are living in the United States, also immigrants, right? So anybody who's coming from a country that is not the United States is an immigrant to the country if they're living here.
Right.
So really recognizing that we've got people who are from English-speaking countries. We've got people who are from countries that there's a different language, again, different experiences, exposures, different levels of community. There are places where you could go where there may be a lot of people from that country of origin. You may move to some places where there really aren't any. So lots of different experiences and levels and issues in the immigrant community.
Right. Having
some sympathy and understanding toward that.
Yeah. And so I think that's the starting point. And then the intentionality behind it, right, is actually, registering, attending, paying for, bringing team members, especially of the HR department, management team members, to cultural sensitivity and awareness trainings, right? Because that's become a very popular topic in recent years, right? As we move towards a more inclusive society, right? We are trying to teach employers how to do better. And I think you introduced it. I mean, that's your mission. That's part of your mission, is how to help employers be more inclusive towards a more diverse population. And so that has to be a part of it, because as I shared before, right, unfortunately, immigration kind of gets wrapped into the diversity and inclusion conversations in HR. But so just to be more intentional about, like, kind of, yes, they are combined, because it has to do with the multiculturalness, and it has to do with being able to attend and be aware and be inclusive to those different cultures, and cultural identities, but also understanding that immigration has its own separate legal issues that are additional stressors to a possible employee.
And it sounds very much, I'm for training everybody. Really, for training everybody.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like there should be your DEI or DEIB training for the entire staff that you have. And maybe there is a separate one, particularly for immigrants and immigration issues, especially for HR, right?
Yes.
Because that's where a lot of these things are going to pop up, right? I have no idea about my coworkers' work status, but HR is going to.
Right, absolutely. Right? Yeah.
And so
I agree. I think that's a great, paradigm there.
Yeah. And so, but to really recognize the fact that there's a separate need, even just from what you were talking about before, from the fact that there are so many statuses, and understanding that the time is different for depending on which avenue you're going through, down to the fact that I could know what their status is that they're applying for if I know how to read the numbers and the codes, right? So really being more knowledgeable about the process, that in itself will help you work with immigrant workers more easily, but also hopefully add to that level of empathy, because I know I feel it now. I thought it was empathetic before, but I was like, wow, okay, I don't know how people do it. It's so much. So Okay, so we've got training and cultural sensitivity, and that's something that people need to be aware of anyway. And I think if you're doing a really good job of creating an inclusive environment in your workplace, and hopefully in those inclusive environments, you talk about avoiding certain topics that immediately divide, right? And if you've got your HR department trained in these things, what are some other things that employers maybe want to look at or consider, or some of those issues that immigrant workers may often face that employers might not be aware of?
Yeah. So I can definitely speak for myself because I feel like, I'm an immigration attorney. I run an immigration law firm. I hire immigrants. I mean, I am all about the hiring process of immigrants because of a couple of things: the empathetic understanding of their process, of our client's process, and also the language, right? The language connection with our clients. But there is this sense of immigrants have a different experience, right? Because especially if they're first generation immigrants, or if they're the children of immigrants that come here to the United States and have to be the translator, the doctor, the receptionist, the complainer on the phone for their parents, the translator at the doctor's office, the interpreter at the tax office. Like when you are an immigrant and you grow up in that setting, you grow up, you mature very quickly, right? You're forced to mature because you have to be an adult for your parents. Right. And so, those are, and it's funny, it's not intentional that we look for it, but I consider those transferable skill sets. I consider that a transferable skill set. So we have a very rigorous hiring process in my office. We do 3 different interviews, referrals, background checks, and all that. And we get to know the person during the hiring process. And I get that not everybody can do that. But for me, it's very important to look for people who have those sets of transferable skill sets, because I know that I can teach them the law. I can teach them the systems. I can teach them how to prepare things. I can teach them the law. Right. I can't teach you empathy. Right. I can't teach you integrity. Either you have it or you don't. Right. And I don't have the time to train that. Right. So I look for those things very, very intentionally. But so, one of the things that we talked about in my office, right, if especially like if they speak English, it's kind of the reverse. If they speak English perfectly, their resume is wonderful, but their Spanish is a little shaky, I will invest the money to help them with, paying for a Spanish tutor, because speaking Spanish in my office is almost mandatory. Required. Yeah. Right. So, I will invest that time into language training. So definitely from an employer standpoint, from an HR standpoint, either to be able to provide some sort of language, onboarding language training, or to offer training materials in the native language. Right. And again, that has to be something that an employer is wanting to do, because it is an investment on the HR department. Well, and I think that language pops up in some places that we don't necessarily think about it. I've heard stories of a woman who had to go to her OBGYN with her boss because he spoke English and she didn't, which is absolutely horrifying. Oh my goodness. I'm like blushing for her. Right. I'm like, I love my boss. I consider her a friend. I don't want to go to the OBGYN with her. No. I will pay for a translator. Right. But then I got to pay out of pocket. Right. I got to pay out of pocket. Yeah. Or even knowing where to get one. I had a parent of a child who was being suspended. She asked the child why she was being suspended. And of course, the child said, I don't know. And all of these conversations, I wound up getting somebody to translate for me in a conversation. And then all of these issues that had been going on in school, I had never been aware of them. I didn't know that she didn't have a translator there, because she didn't know that she could have called downtown to get a translator there at the service. So lots of times and same thing for the doctor's office, most of the doctors also have translation services available, right? Yep. But if you don't know that, you're not going to ask. You're not going to ask for that. Right. And so even some places like with language, having language available is fantastic, but also telling people where they can get translation services, how they can get things translated easily or low cost, no cost.
people who are required by law to provide translation services, all of those things, having that in some place where this is, if you need resources, this is a place you can go.
Yeah.
And that's probably an HR webpage. It's not, this doesn't have to be this huge investment to provide some of these support services or understanding of systems in this country for immigrant workers.
Right. And excellent point. So there is so we in our office use a translation service out of Orlando. It's owned by this Colombian lady. Love her. She has interpreters, from all different countries. And so you actually can do like a monthly fee where you're available, they have an available translator for you for, 60 minutes. Like there's ways where it can be very cost effective for an employer to be able to offer that as a service. Granted, if the job description requires English, then there has to be, also apart from the employee that they're trying to improve their English, but there's also, online classes, there's, college classes here at FCCJ, they have English, the churches have English classes. So the idea, right, is that both are putting the effort, right, and they're both making progress, right? Because it can't just fall on one or the other.
Right. But I also think there's for people who are learning the language, right? I know a decent amount of French. It's not great, but I know a decent amount of French. If you ask me for medical French, no clue. None.
Right.
That's not what they teach you in class. If you ask me legal questions where I really have to make sure I'm understanding precisely what's being said, we should not have that conversation in French, right? So even for people who are able to speak English well enough to do the job, there are still going to be some areas of their life where they would really need to be speaking in their native language.
Absolutely.
Right. And so even having that understanding, so yes, we
I
need
agree.
a level of English proficiency, but you still may have some places where you're going to need to speak in your native language. Here are some services available for that.
Right. And then I think you touched on systems, understanding systems. And that's something that actually I started a nonprofit for this very reason. The idea, right, is to be able to bring in, for immigrants who come to Northeast Florida, to be able to understand like how things run. And so one of the things I remember, I had an employee who didn't have a car. She was using the bus, but she didn't, she wasn't sure of the bus system. So she would wait an hour before, an hour, she'd be waiting to come in for an hour before her time. And then she'd have to wait another hour after her time. Because she just wasn't sure of the time. And so all I did was go and print out the bus pass, the bus schedule for her in Spanish. And then we were able to coordinate her work schedule so that her work schedule would permit for her to be able to travel with, minimal time. And again, I know I could do that because I'm a small business, but I had her, for about a year, and she had to leave because of personal issues. But I'm a firm believer in investing up front. As an employer, I feel like you almost have that obligation to invest up front because employees don't owe you anything.
Right.
They don't owe you anything. And there's this misconception that because you pay them, they owe you. Yes, you're getting paid for a service, right? That they're getting paid for a service that they're providing. But if you are looking for long-term commitment, if you're looking for loyalty, investment is required.
Right.
It's required up front.
Right. And
not when it's too late.
And this is one of those things that we talk about all the time, right? The cost of non-retention, because then you're having to go out, look for somebody else, do more recruiting. You've got to do training, all that again. Whereas if you make that investment up front, and it is that I care about you as a person. I see you as a person, and I see the challenges and issues that you have, and I want to help you through that if possible. That investment builds that loyalty.
Oh, absolutely.
And people are like, oh, I want to stay because I'm happy here. I feel included.
I feel seen.
I feel seen and heard and valued. Just for small things, sometimes that little investment of time saves you so much time later.
I'll give you another example. I had another employee who, so I think also a key point is to remember, we do have different demographics of employees today, right? We have the millennials, we have the Gen X, we have the Gen Y, the Gen, I don't know what, but there's like all these gens, right? That we have to be aware. And granted, they're not all the same, right? There are a lot of generalizations about the classifications of employees, but generalizations exist for a reason, right? There's some of it is true. And so get to know, right? Like get to know them, get to know them on a personal level, like you said. Because I will tell you, I have a couple millennials and Gen X, is it Gen Y? Which is the one after millennials? The younger ones, Gen Z. I have a couple Gen Zs that I've had to change my training style because it didn't coordinate with their capacity to retain information. And so, you know, it was a rude awakening at first because I was like, oh, this is super frustrating. But when you make the shift and you start seeing the change immediately, you're like, okay, I did the right thing. I made the right investment. And that, let me tell you, is one of the most powerful things. I always say in my office, my team is my weapon. Everyone, you gave me this great introduction, but I owe it to 100% to them because I'm nothing without them. So we're very adamant about this team culture and this cultural awareness. That's something that we do retreats on. We do conversations. We talk about our strengths. We talk about how their top strengths work with my top strength. And we do all these like workshops to ensure that everybody is feeling seen and heard. Because when you have one empowered person, that empowered person helps empower those around them. And then they all feel empowered, and then they're all more productive, and they're happier, and they're more efficient. And it's just like you create this working machine that you sit back. Like sometimes I sit back and I'm like, holy shit, you know, like I built this. We built this. So I do think for me, the main takeaway for employers, and because I know you asked me earlier, is the investment, is being conscious of that. You might lose sometimes. You're going to lose sometimes. You're going to have that employee that's not going to work out. But you created a system for the next employee to be able to, take advantage of that investment.
Well, and I was thinking about something you were saying of people feeling empowered. And I think one key factor in that we haven't touched on, but I think is very, very important with this conversation, is the issue of safety, right?
Yes. We talked, we had I guess another podcast, huh?
Yeah.
Yep. Oh man, this is my second podcast with you.
But this becomes an issue or a challenge. Like, I'm a Black woman. I know that there are certain places that I cannot go or I won't go because I don't feel safe.
Right.
And I think that that's not always perceived by others who aren't walking in my shoes.
Absolutely.
Right. And so for people in the middle of an immigration process where things have maybe, we don't want to make any mistakes. We don't want anything to go wrong. I want to make sure this gets handled. And people may make assumptions about who they are, what their status is. We've seen this all the time, right? We've seen people being held at airports when they were actually U.S. citizens who were born here, right? But they look like they could be blah, blah, blah. What are some of the things that employers should be thinking about to make sure that they are creating safe spaces for immigrant workers? So
training. I think it really starts at the top. It starts with management. It starts with HR. It starts with the executives. It starts with the department heads. It starts with the sales leads. It starts with the people who have employees working under them. They have to be part of these trainings. And again, these have to be very intentional trainings. It can't just be like, oh, we're going to have a diversity and inclusion training. I mean, that's great. Yes, absolutely. But if you have a high demographic of immigrants, you need to be intentionally having trainings where somebody's coming, an objective third party is coming into the company, into the corporation, into that conference room and having an honest conversation about how to treat, immigrant employees or what things to look out for or how to create a safe space for them. Because the second that you have your leadership observing this, right, the idea is that it's going to trickle down. Like and again, it's not always going to happen. You're going to have those individuals that are not going to be happy with that training and they'll go and complain to HR and, the HR can decide what they want to do with that.
Right.
Right. But if your intention is to create a safe space for all employees, then those trainings have to be for all.
and they have to be consistent, right?
Absolutely. It's not enough to just say, I did it in 2020. No, it's, you schedule them maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. Maybe you have small retreats where you're focusing on different cultural backgrounds, or you're focusing on different cultural sensitivity trainings, right? But there is your team, your entire team is aware that management has made an intention to make this a priority.
Right. And that priority is emphasized. Yes. If it's a priority, I hear about it all the time, right? I know it's a priority that we make budget. Mm-hmm. I do not just hear about that once a year. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Yep. We're having that conversation regularly, right? So if it's a priority, then it has to be consistent. Right? You said it, yep. And I have to see it in a multitude of places. If we're really trying to create an inclusive community, that's not just the training, right? Then that's how staff meetings go. That's what the newsletter says. That's how our events are structured. That's how we engage with employees in meetings. All of the things work toward that priority. And so if you're creating a safe space for immigrants and for all of your employees, that is throughout the things that you're doing. And that
I would add something, Regina, too, that I think as a business owner, right? I run my business. I'm in charge of employees. I'm in charge of payroll, but I'm a lawyer, right? My job is to be a lawyer, but I have this whole other admin side of running things. And the lawyer part of me is like, yeah, I got this, like I can learn it. I can do CLE panels. I can study it. I can read the book. I can learn it. But the admin side of things, right? Like the learning to manage people is the hardest part of my job because it's managing people. Right. It's the single hardest thing. Yeah.
And people have different issues.
And you have new people and you have old people and you have, and I'm not referring old as in age, as in like longer employees.
People have been there for a while.
And so you have like the mix of bringing somebody in new to the culture and making sure that the culture is protected and all that stuff. So I will definitely admit to you that the hardest part of my day-to-day operations is managing people. But one of the things that I learned the hard way is that I'm imperfect. I'm a human being and I make mistakes and I mess up and I need to be accountable for that. I need to say I'm sorry to the person who I've offended. I expect accountability from my team members, so I have to be accountable to them too. And so I think from an employer standpoint, from management side, I don't believe that there's enough accountability from management to their team members, to their employees. And I think that's a really good way to earn trust and to make people feel safe is to be accountable for when they make mistakes.
Oh, you're speaking my language. I love it. I love it. I think that's extremely wise. And so, we've been talking about this and, all right, so I need to be accountable and I need to do these trainings and I need to make sure that people know these things. And then there's all these different processes and work permits. Maybe we just shouldn't hire immigrants, right? And so.
Wrong answer.
Okay. And you have immigrants who are working for you, which means you're having to do extra paperwork and you're having to oftentimes maybe fill out petitions and do all of these steps that you don't have to do.
Actually, it's one of the benefits that we offer in my office is if you or your family needs papers, I got you. That's a benefit that we offer.
So, which, by the way, the fact that could be listed as a benefit, we'll list that as a reason. But why should employers hire immigrants?
Because we are the best. Okay, we are. I mean,
what they say to Hamilton, immigrants, we get the job done.
Yep, immigrants, we get the job done. I mean, it's in Broadway. It's official. And so it depends on who the audience, right? It depends on who we're asking, right? It depends on the audience. But immigrants provide immigrants have a sense of responsibility that is like no other. And, I have a lot of different friends from different backgrounds. And of course, that's true for a lot of them also. But as a collective group, immigrants have a huge sense of responsibility. They're very family oriented. So, their number one priority is their family. They will work hard. They will go hard for their family. they bring a sense, they bring multicultural to your entire, office. And that includes food, that includes culture, that includes music, that includes artists, that includes color. Immigrants bring color to your life. That's a fact. And let me tell you, a sense of humor.
Yes.
A sense of humor. We try to eat lunch every day together. We actually block off on my calendar from 12:30 to 2 o'clock every single day so that we can try to eat lunch together. We try to coordinate it because lunchtime tends to be our favorite time of the day. Everybody tells stories and everybody laughs, and there is this desire to connect. It's a very inherent desire to connect. And so when you have an employee that's connected, you're building an employee that's invested. And when you have an employee that's invested, you're going to have more long-term success with that employee.
And I think about the people that I have worked with who have been immigrants, and I have worked with immigrants from a number of regions. And currently my niece is living in Japan, and nice. She's an immigrant, right? Yeah. So the amount of perspective I have been able to gain, the view broadening that has happened because, I was born in the States and I have been exposed to an American way of thinking and American way of doing.
Absolutely.
Everybody doesn't do it this way. Everybody doesn't think that way. And it's really nice to be able to say, oh, this is a different consideration. It doesn't in any way challenge mine.
Right.
It gives me an additional option.
It broadens
your viewpoint.
Right. And why wouldn't you want to have a more open, broad, diverse view of the world? Exactly.
And a better understanding. I've been able to make some connections in cultures, been able to think about where some things originated from, because we've got a version of that in my culture and you've got a version of that. Okay, where did that come from? And having conversations about that. It's wonderful to people who work here to just have that, hey, some exposure to something new, to something different. Food, language, culture, ideology, beliefs, values, ways of doing things, small things, big things. But it's really nice to just, again, you said broaden your viewpoint. So in addition to the fact that I think there's a loyalty that I see with immigrant workers and a work ethic that I don't see with others, right? I saw that in school for the students who were from the different countries, 3 a.m., they were still studying. I was like, I got to go to bed. Nope, I'm not done. And it was this, I have this opportunity. I am not going to waste it. And I see that same kind of mentality with a lot of the immigrant workers that I have worked with. There is that loyalty, that dedication, that work ethic, that push through. And I think that is something that makes sense for the experience, especially if I have to go through all of this paperwork and legality to get here. You better believe I'm going to maximize the opportunity, right?
Yep.
And so that, I think, is really a benefit as far as what you get as an employee. But that's something that another benefit that also comes to your work community, just that broadening. So fantastic. All right, so
I feel like we need a part 2 for.
We need a part 2, a part 3, a part 12. We need to go for a while. Okay, so as we sort of wrap things up for today, if you were thinking about the one big takeaway for employers from our discussion, what would you say is the one thing you would really want them to focus on if they didn't focus on any other things that we discussed today?
I think I mentioned it already. Definitely the prioritizing the investment up front. I think employers, again, this is my perspective, and I've been very fortunate to have a great team. I truly believe, because of my perception on the importance of investing. I have a lot of friends that tell me, you do too much for your team. And I'm like, how much do they do for me and my clients? Like, there's no comparison. And I understand that not all employers can do that, but there are small ways to show up for their employees, right? So just the intentionality of being, one, investing in their new hires. Actually, there was a study, and I wanted to share with you, but it was a study back from 2015 that said employers are less likely to invest in immigrant employees, especially if they're non-English speaking employees, than they are for native employees, which is such a shame, right? Because like you said, it's too much work.
Right.
It's too much work. But if you just take the time to invest that little extra step, ask how you can show up for them, ask how you can help them, ask what they need. I see you as a person, but I see all these issues that you're struggling with. How can I help you? That conversation is life-changing for them. And I think if employers were made that effort more intentionally, they would see it wouldn't be an immediate return, right? But they would see a long-term investment. Or what is it called? A return on investment in that specific employee. And if you do that for one, you do that for all. You create this culture of like, this is the baseline, right? This is the baseline. We start here. We show up for you, and so we show up for you, and they're going to show up for you automatically. Yep. So, and I think one of the biggest things, the first step you can do to make that happen is hire a business consultant to come and talk about culture awareness and culture sensitivity. Have that diversity inclusion with a recognition of immigration as a separate but equally important topic in that concept. And that can be a start of a retreat, and that starts the conversation amongst your team members of like what works and what doesn't, because you might identify there may be something that one employee has been struggling with that another one can help them with, and they can problem solve together, right? But they don't do it. They don't talk about it because they don't feel safe to talk about it. Right. So you open up the windows, you open up the lines of communication amongst each other, not just management. It's not just for management, right? But amongst team members too. It's amazing what can happen when they start helping each other out and they start transforming each other. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that also that awareness comes into recognizing some things that are cultural differences. I've seen that on some teams, and they were like, well, so-and-so's not participating and not doing this. And I was like, I think this is a cultural difference. That's not where she's going to feel like she is trying to take over. But if you ask her specifically to do that, she'd be very helpful and be willing to do it. But she doesn't want to seem like she's jumping in, right? That's a cultural difference.
Yep, absolutely.
And so we've got to be able to talk about that and then work through it. And sure enough, that's exactly what it was. So having that awareness and working in the teams and having those conversations is really important.
Absolutely.
To building that. And I think for me, it's get informed, like get the knowledge. There's so much that you could do if you understood the process, even to the fact that if I know a little bit more about the immigration process, even just knowing the different avenues of which you can apply, right? And what's required, some basic level knowledge. I certainly don't want to become an immigration attorney, but knowing that, or knowing that you will need to do this, you're going to need to fill out this, and we probably should go see Andrea. She'll be taking care of it, right? Having that understanding and awareness, providing that for your HR team. Like if leadership and the HR team have to be knowledgeable.
Involved, yeah. And I think to that point, Regina, I totally forgot to mention it, but some of the ways that an employer can, you asked me that question about like what they can do very quickly is, if you as an employer, HR know that person is in some sort of immigration process, offer, hey, I don't know what stage you're in, but if you need some sort of verification letter from your employer of good moral character, or you need some sort of proof that you're employed here, I'm happy to provide that letter when the time comes. Just let me know what you need, and I'll be happy to sign it. Right? Like offering that off the bat, like you just, because, they're already guarded. They're like, oh my God, I have this job. I don't want to lose it.
I don't want to rock the boat.
Right. And oftentimes, I'll be honest with you, a lot of the times when immigrants get a work permit and they're social, it's the first time they have like an ID with their name, right? Right. So they want to make sure they do it right. And of course, immigration is so taboo. They don't want to talk about their immigration status. So you offering that off the bat, just saying, hey, not sure what status you're in, or you got lawful work permit and a lawful social security number, so you can work. You're legally authorized to work, no problem. But whatever process you're in, if you need something from me, let me know. I'll be happy to provide that. Oof, you're going to disarm them, and they're going to feel safe already.
As you say, that creates a safe space.
Yeah, just
in addition to the support, that's safe. Okay, I can have my card and have my work, and I'm okay here.
Yes. I can come to work, and I know I'm not going to be, or at least I feel like I'm not going to be discriminated against because of my immigration status.
Oh, that's phenomenal. And again, that took you 30 seconds to say?
30 seconds to say.
And there it is. All right. Well, this, again, sort of part 2, part 3, 8, 12,
there was so much
16,
we didn't talk about.
24. So we will definitely have you back. But Andrea, this is fantastic. Has been so great. And just so for employers or anyone who might be listening who may need some help with their immigration process, can you let them know how to get a hold of you?
Sure. So I actually don't handle employment immigration, which is its own separate field of law, but I'm happy to refer to, I have great attorneys everywhere, depending on whether corporations included, but located. But of course, any general questions about immigration, we oftentimes have employers that will pay for the consultation fee for the immigrant to come and see what their options are. Unfortunately, the way that immigration laws are written, you can't really, like an employer just can't petition for someone. There has to be all this, like I said, all these requirements, schooling, skill set, and you have to be able to document that. So, it's really nice when the employer's like, I'll petition for you, but it's like, that's the first part.
Right,
there's all this
other stuff that has to happen too.
Yeah, that hasn't happened and won't happen. So, the employer can't really do anything. But just the fact of offering is huge. But yes, I'm happy to answer any questions. We are located on Atlantic Boulevard. Our phone number is 904-513-4455. We are on Instagram. We are on Facebook. Reyes Legal, Reyes is my last name, legal, and then PLLC. So you can find us on our website, our Facebook, and our Instagram.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. And again, you just have so much knowledge and so much information, and truthfully, just so much compassion. The work that you have done in the immigrant community here has been phenomenal, and the awareness you have created in this community has been tremendously helpful. So for that, I thank you. And
thank you.
Thank you for coming and sharing.
I love that you're doing this. This is great. I hope this gets spread it spreads like wildfire all over corporate America.
All right. I want everybody to listen, everybody to know.
We're going to get a lot of hate mail, but okay.
It's okay. As long as we're getting the message out to people, and really hopefully making a difference, because these are the things that really transform lives. And that's really what we want to do here. So this has been great.
I love it. Thank you. I think just having the conversation is extremely important, but then just talking about the one thing that you can do and how that can shift the entire perspective is super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. And thank you for joining us for this episode of The Business of Race. Please, please, please click that subscribe button so that you'll be notified of our new content every week. Like us. We like to be liked. It's a great thing. Give us a thumbs up if you are approving of this content and want to hear more. We thank you for joining us in the conference room today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.